For hundreds of years, the edge of Terran space had been quiet, a frozen curtain of darkness known as the Dead Line, stretching across the stars like a wound no one dared reopen. It was not a peace born of friendship. It was fear, the kind of fear that comes when one side remembers and the other tries to forget. The Galactic Empire had built its arrogance on that silence, expanding its reach across 1,000 worlds, building fleets of shimmering gold and silver, and rewriting history to paint humans as a relic of the past, a violent species that had burned itself out. They called Earth a dying ember in a galaxy full of suns, and so, generation after generation, their admirals began to whisper, maybe the stories were wrong, maybe the Deathwalders had gone extinct, maybe that border wasn't guarded at all. They told themselves humanity was finished, that Terran command was nothing more than an old myth told to scare young cadets. And then came the day Admiral Sareth decided to find out. He was a proud man, a product of the Empire's finest academies, his armor gleaming with the insignia of countless campaigns, his name spoken with respect and fear across Imperial fleets. He had conquered systems, crushed rebellions, and burned colonies that resisted the Emperor's rule. But beneath his victory banners lived something else, a hunger to carve his name into history, to do what no other commander dared. And when the Emperor summoned him to the Grand Hall of Marble and Fire and said, "The next expansion begins beyond the Terran border," Sareth didn't hesitate. He bowed deeply and said, "It will be done." The Emperor's smile was thin. "Be careful, Admiral. Legends live in the dark." Sareth's reply came with quiet pride, "Then I will be the one to end them." So his fleet prepared. Hundreds of warships rose from their dry docks, their hulls glowing under the suns of the imperial capital, shimmering like an ocean of metal. From orbit, it looked like a god's hand gathering thunder. Commanders lined up across the decks of their ships, their faces pale with the thrill of the unknown. On every channel, imperial propaganda blared, "The galaxy belongs to those who take it. The Empire fears no ghosts." The fleets ignited their drives and surged forward, leaving behind trails of white-blue light, cutting across the void toward Terran space. On the far side of the border, the void was darker than anywhere else in the galaxy, a stretch of nothing so absolute that even starlight seemed afraid to enter. There were no trade routes, no colonies, no signals, just silence. The Empire called it the Dead Line, but to Terran command, it had another name, the Shield of Quiet. Deep beneath Lunar Base, buried under kilometers of reinforced rock and shadow, Commander Elise Ward sat before a console glowing red with new movement alerts. She was not young. Her face carried the calm of someone who had seen too much to ever panic again. Her eyes reflected the map of the galaxy, the border glowing faintly in blue, and beyond it, red dots. Many of them. The sensors hummed as the system identified them automatically. Imperial warships, multiple classes, multiple signatures. The officer beside her froze, his hands trembling slightly as he whispered, Confirmation from outer stations. 300 vessels crossing the perimeter at high speed." Elise didn't react. She just leaned forward, her fingers tapping the table once. 300, she repeated quietly. And not a single one turned back. The young officer hesitated. "Should I alert the Fleet Council?" She shook her head slowly. "Not yet." She stared at the red line blinking on the screen. "Let them come closer. Let them see nothing." Outside, far beyond Earth and Mars, near the silent border itself, automated Terran defense drones powered on in total silence. No light, no sound, no transmissions. Each one was an invisible machine of war, wrapped in stealth fields, designed to observe and wait. And they did. 4 hours. The Imperial fleet sailed across the darkness like a parade, their hulls glowing proudly, unaware that thousands of Terran eyes were already watching. Every movement, every signal, every formation was logged, mapped, and transmitted across secret channels back to Luna. Humanity didn't respond with noise or threats. It watched, as it always had, from the shadows of its own creation. Admiral Sareth stood on the bridge of his flagship, Eternal Vow, staring out into the endless dark. He had expected resistance. Fleets. Stations. Gunfire. Instead, there was nothing. The stars hung still. His officers looked uneasy, but he smiled. "See? The stories were lies," he said. "The humans are gone. The border is nothing but empty space." One of his lieutenants shifted nervously. "Sir, our long-range scanners show distortions. Small ones. Possibly debris." "Debris from what?" Sarath asked sharply. "Old wrecks, perhaps, but there are no energy readings. No ships." He turned to face his crew. "Then we proceed. We mark this as the first official crossing of Terran space by Imperial authority." The officers hesitated for only a second before responding in unison. "Yes, Admiral." The engines flared brighter, and the fleet moved forward. At Lunar Base, the air inside Command Center 3 had grown still. The sound of distant hums and data streams filled the room like whispers. Elise Ward's voice broke the silence. "Transmit code to the watchtowers. Authorization Ward 7. The comms officer blinked. That activates the Sentinel network." "I know." The officer hesitated. "That protocol hasn't been used in 200 years, Elise finished for him. "And we built it for this moment." The officer swallowed and began typing. Across the solar system, ancient satellites that had been silent for generations flickered back to life. Long-range cannons hidden in the rings of Saturn powered up. Black ships buried under the ice of Europa hummed with awakening energy. And beneath Pluto's shadow, something vast, something bigger than any fleet, shifted. Humanity's old war machines were waking from their sleep. Meanwhile, back in Imperial space, rumors began to spread faster than the fleet could travel. Reports whispered through the military channels. Old captains telling tales about how humanity had once wiped out whole star clusters to stop invaders. Others claimed the dead line was cursed, that no signal ever came back from beyond it. The Empire dismissed them as myths, but fear is stubborn. On the Eternal Vow, even Saratha's crew began to lower their voices, glancing nervously at their radar screens that occasionally glitched with static shadows. Hours passed, and still, no Terran fleet appeared. The border was crossed, and the Empire's admirals waited for the galaxy to applaud them. Instead, the stars seemed to hold their breath. On Luna, Elise Ward stood before the holomap as the Imperial fleet's coordinates updated in real time. "They're inside the perimeter," said her aide. "What now?" Elise looked at the glowing red mass on the map, the massive fleet that had entered human space uninvited. Her face was calm, her voice quieter than a whisper. "Now," she said, "they remember." A deep rumble echoed through the bunker as power conduits surged. Across the dark void, the first of the Sentinel stations sent out an invisible pulse, scanning every Imperial ship at once. On their bridges, alarms blared as power fluctuated, sensors went blind, and every crew member felt the hairs on their skin rise. One ensign shouted, "Admiral, we're being scanned. By what? Identify the source." Sarath barked, but the technician's voice cracked. "There's nothing there, sir. No signal origin. It's everywhere." Then, just as suddenly as it began, the power returned. The ships stabilized. And then the message came. Every console flickered, every holographic screen glitched, and across all Imperial channels, one line appeared in bold white letters. "This is Terran Command. You have crossed into restricted space. Turn back immediately." For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then the communications officer laughed nervously. "They're using old protocols, sir. This is a ghost transmission." Sarath smirked. "Ignore it. They are bluffing." But before the words could leave his mouth, the entire fleet dimmed, lights flickering, gravity momentarily failing, engines falling silent as if the ships themselves had been seized by invisible hands. The systems rebooted automatically, but when they came back online, all data logs had been erased. Every ship's AI was blank. And again, on every screen, the same words appeared, this time glowing red, "This is your only warning." The bridge fell silent. Saratha's hands tightened on the console. "Reboot everything," he ordered. "Find where that transmission came from." The officer whispered, "It came from inside the fleet, sir. From us." Far away, In Luna's underground war room, Elise Ward closed her eyes as the comms confirmed transmission success. Her expression didn't change. "Now we wait," she said softly. Her aide frowned. If they keep advancing, then they'll see what happens when you touch the line," she said, eyes fixed on the void. Back in the Empire's fleet, the stars outside seemed dimmer now. The void around them thickened, darker than before, swallowing even the reflected light from their engines. One officer whispered, "Sir, I can't see our escort ships anymore." "They are right there," Sareth snapped. But when he turned to the viewport, there was nothing. Just endless dark. No blips on radar. No return signals. Just one message flashing in Terran code across his display, repeating itself in a slow pulse, "Leave." And for the first time in his long, proud career, Admiral Sareth hesitated. Something in the void was watching. Something that did not speak, did not move, did not need to be seen to be feared. And on Luna, Commander Elise Ward opened a secure channel and whispered 4 words that would awaken Earth's sleeping giants across the stars. "Initiate Protocol Iron Dawn." The alarms across Luna Base had not yet faded when Commander Elise Ward stood silently before the holomap, the blue light of Terran space glowing faintly against her face as the red dots of the invading Imperial fleet pulsed steadily forward, like a spreading wound. Around her, dozens of officers moved with trained precision, their voices low but tense, every word clipped with the sharp edge of fear they tried to hide. The air vibrated with the hum of power systems rerouting energy toward outer defenses, and in the background, a synthetic voice repeated across the intercom, "Unauthorized entry confirmed. Sector 12 breach. Deadline violated." Yet through the noise and chaos, Elise was still, too still. Her calmness was not weakness. It was the kind of calm that came from surviving things most people could never imagine. She had seen the old wars, the ones the galaxy had conveniently forgotten. She knew exactly what was coming next. Slowly she said, "Send the message." The communications officer turned toward her, uncertain. The warning message." "Yes," Elise replied, her eyes never leaving the map. "They crossed the line. They need to remember what that means." Moments later, somewhere far away in the black gulf of space, the massive formation of the Imperial fleet continued its slow march into the Forbidden Zone. Hundreds of ships gleamed against the starlight, their hulls a perfect mirror of arrogance and pride. To them, it was a victory already won. They had entered Terran territory, and nothing had happened. No fleets, no resistance, no fire. The Empire's soldiers whispered through their comms that humanity was finished, that Terran command was nothing but a myth built by cowards who had once hidden behind machines. They didn't know that every inch they traveled deeper into the void was being measured, recorded, and studied by invisible eyes that never blinked. Suddenly, every Imperial ship flickered. Lights dimmed, engines hummed unevenly, and holoscreens turned black before a line of white text burned across them all. "This is Terran command. You have crossed into restricted space. Turn back immediately." The message played on every frequency, every language. It was cold, mechanical, emotionless, like the voice of something ancient and absolute. Laughter broke out across some bridges, the kind that hides fear. Admiral Sareth stood tall in the command pit of his flagship, staring at the words. "How cute," he said. "The ghosts are trying to scare us." His second officer frowned. "Sir, it came through every channel, even encrypted ones. That shouldn't be possible." Sareth waved him off. "Run diagnostics. It's just old tech echoing." But as he turned back to his console, the words on the screen changed. "This is your only warning." Then everything died. Gravity vanished for 2 seconds. The artificial lights blinked out, leaving the entire fleet suspended in total darkness, hundreds of thousands of lives floating in silence between stars. Then, as if reality itself was exhaling, systems rebooted. Life returned, lights flared back to life, engines stabilized, but nothing was the same. Their navigation data was gone. Every log, every star chart, every recorded path had been erased from every system simultaneously. "How is that possible?" the communications officer shouted. Saratha's voice was hard now, the amusement gone. Report all systems. Reboot external sensors. Now. The bridge crew scrambled, hands shaking as they typed into consoles that refused to respond. When the sensors finally came online, the results chilled everyone. The stars had shifted. The fleet wasn't where it had been. Somehow, while the lights were out, they had moved, no one could explain how. But their position data showed they were no longer just inside the border. They were deep in Terran space. Back on Luna, Elise Ward's eyes tracked their exact coordinates as the data streamed across her console. "They are too far to turn back without help now," said her aide quietly. Elise didn't look away. "Good. Now they'll listen." She leaned forward and activated the next command level. "Patch me through to Central Command," she said. The main screen came alive, showing the emblem of the Terran Council. A circle of blue stars around a dark Earth. "This is Commander Ward," she said. "We have a confirmed incursion." The Empire crossed the line, requesting authorization for containment protocol. The voice that answered was low and old, full of gravity. "Are you certain, Commander?" Elise's tone didn't waver. "Positive. 300 ships. Flagship class, full combat formation." They ignored the first warning. Silence followed for a heartbeat. Then the voice said, "Authorization granted. Proceed with Iron Dawn containment. Do not initiate conflict unless provoked." Elise gave a small nod. "Understood. Iron Dawn in progress." Out in the dark, the Empire's fleet tried to regain control of the situation. Admiral Sarath paced his bridge, his anger simmering under the surface. "Get me a visual on anything nearby. I want to see what's out there." The officer hesitated. "Sir, there's nothing. The sensors detect empty space." "Impossible," Sarath snapped. "We were near the border just hours ago." The officer swallowed hard. "Sir, the stars don't match any known system." Every eye turned toward the viewport. The galaxy outside had changed. The stars were faint, distorted, as if the fleet had been dropped into a pocket of space that wasn't supposed to exist. No nebulae, no planets, not even cosmic radiation. It was void, pure, silent void. Then came the first anomaly. The nearest destroyer reported a shadow moving across its hull, too large to be debris, too fast to track. The comm crackled. "Command, we're detecting gravitational distortion." The voice cut off. Static filled the line. Then came another call from a cruiser on the far left flank. "Something's out there. No signatures. It's like the dark itself is moving." Sarath turned sharply to his officers. "Prepare targeting arrays. Load plasma ordnance." "Sir, at what?" one asked. "At whatever's watching us." But before they could even finish the command, the ship shuddered. Every alarm on the flagship screamed as energy spiked across the hull. "We're being scanned," someone yelled. "From way." "Every direction." The bridge lights turned red, flickering in pulses that matched the rhythm of a heartbeat. The ship's AI stuttered. "Warning, external interference detected. Defensive systems offline." Then, silence again. Sarath clenched his fists. "Find the source." But when his officers looked up, the stars outside were gone. The viewport showed only black. No light, no reflections, just absolute void. Then, faintly, a blue glow emerged, lines forming across the darkness, like invisible structures waking from sleep. Thousands of thin lines, vast, geometric, stretching out beyond sight. They formed a wall of light, enormous and ancient, standing between the Empire's fleet and the deeper reaches of Terran space. A voice filled the comms again, this time deeper, stronger, as if spoken by the void itself. "You have entered restricted space. Final warning. Turn back immediately." Saratha's pride was the last thing keeping him from fear. "They are bluffing," he said, forcing steadiness into his voice. "Prepare to fire on the source." But even as he spoke, Elise Ward's calm voice echoed across the Terran command center. "They won't listen. They never do." She turned to her tactical officer. Send the next transmission. The officer's hands flew over the controls. In deep space, across the black void, every Imperial ship received one final message, for words flashing in blood-red text: return, or be erased. Saratha's jaw tightened. So that's how they want to play. He turned to his bridge crew and shouted, "Target the source. Fire everything." A storm of plasma fire erupted into the void, lighting the darkness like a false dawn. But when the light faded, there was nothing, no explosion, no impact, no resistance, just the black wall of silence staring back. Then, one by one, the firing ships went dark. Their lights died, their reactors silenced, their power readings flatlined as if existence itself had turned them off. On Luna, Elise watched the red dots disappear from the tactical map, her expression unchanged. Her aide whispered, That's 30 ships, gone. No debris, no explosion." "Then the line still holds," she said quietly. The aide swallowed hard. "Should we continue Iron Dawn?" Elise finally turned from the screen, her voice calm but sharp as steel. "No need. The message has been delivered. They'll remember now." Out in the darkness, the Empire's survivors stared into the void, their pride shattered, their weapons useless. Somewhere in the silence, the voice of Terran command spoke one last time before vanishing into static. "This is your only warning. Do not cross again." And as the flickering lights of the Empire's fleet retreated into the distance, the stars of the dead line returned to their rightful stillness, waiting, watching, guarding humanity's silence once more. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound Admiral Sarath had ever known, a crushing kind of quiet that pressed against the walls of his flagship. As if the void itself was holding its breath, his fleet drifted slowly in formation. The ships that had once glowed with Imperial pride now dimmed to shadows, half their systems barely alive, half their captains whispering prayers they never believed in before. On the bridge of the Eternal Vow, Sarath stood motionless, staring at the tactical display, his jaw tight, his hands gripping the railing so hard that the metal groaned beneath his fingers. 30 ships, gone. Not destroyed, not damaged, just gone, erased without fire, without debris, without time to scream. "Re-establish contact with the fleet," he ordered, his voice low but sharp. "Find the nearest surviving vessel." The communications officer's voice shook as she replied, "Sir, we can't. There's static on all channels. It's like the dark itself is jamming us." "Then use hardline signals," Sarath snapped. But the officer looked up helplessly. "There are no hardlines, sir. They're gone too." The words hung in the air like a verdict. Sarath turned slowly toward the viewport, his reflection staring back at him in the black glass. Tired, furious, uncertain for the first time in his career. The stars outside were wrong. He knew it. They were dimmer, colder, twisted slightly in ways that defied physics. His navigator whispered, "Sir, I don't think we're in normal space anymore." Back on Lunar Base, Commander Elise Ward stood before the Central Command holo, the massive projection showing the fading outlines of the Imperial fleet retreating in chaos, a sea of red dots turning pale and scattered. Her aide approached quietly, his voice hesitant. Imperial forces have lost formation. Most are trying to leave the sector." Elise nodded slightly but didn't look away. "Most," she repeated, "but not all." Her aide frowned. "You think they'll come back?" "The proud always do," she said simply. "They think defiance is strength. But they're about to learn the difference between defiance and suicide." She moved closer to the holo, zooming in on one single red dot, the flagship. "Keep tracking that one," she said. "He's not done yet." And she was right. Aboard the Eternal Vow, Admiral Saratha's pride was bleeding into desperation. "We are the Empire," he growled. "We don't run from shadows." Around him, the crew stayed silent. The air stank of fear and burning circuits, the faint ozone of overworked systems filling the bridge. He turned sharply to his first officer. "Send drones ahead. Full sensor sweep. I want to know what's out there." The officer hesitated. "Sir, the last drones never came back." Then send more, Sareth snapped. 10 squadrons. If we can't see our enemy, we'll force them to show themselves. The command was obeyed, and within minutes, hundreds of small Recon drones launched from the fleet, darting into the black. Their feeds flickered across screens. Stars, static, emptiness. Then, one by one, they vanished. Not destroyed. Not jammed. Just gone. Every feed cut at the same exact second, time-stamped down to the nanosecond. The bridge went silent again. One junior officer muttered, "Sir, it's like something swallowed them whole." "Enough," Sareth barked. "There's no something. There's only the humans' tricks. They're using illusions to scare us." But even as he said it, the doubt in his voice was impossible to hide. Hours passed like days. Some ships broke formation and began to drift back toward the border, their captains ignoring orders. Fear spread through the fleet like a virus. Onboard comms filled with whispers, "We shouldn't be here." The stories were true. They said the Terrans had weapons that could erase entire star systems. Sareth tried to drown them out with commands, with threats, with his own voice echoing through the comms like a man fighting ghosts, but it didn't matter. The more he shouted, the quieter his fleet became. On Lunar Base, Elise Ward watched all of it happen from millions of kilometers away. Every Imperial transmission was being intercepted and decoded in real time. "They are panicking," her aide said. "Their discipline's breaking." Elise didn't smile, but there was a glint in her eyes. "Good," she said. "Let fear do the work for us. It's more effective than any gun." She walked slowly toward the observation window, where the darkness of space stretched endlessly, hiding humanity's secrets. "Activate the echo arrays," she ordered. The technician blinked. Those are psychological warfare systems." "I know what they are," she replied. "Turn them on." Within seconds, dozens of deep space stations hidden along the dead line came to life. They didn't fire weapons, they broadcast illusions. Low-frequency waves that twisted perception, light, and sound, designed to haunt invaders. To make them see things that weren't there. And so it began. On the Eternal Vow, the lights flickered again. The navigation screen showed movement, massive shapes moving through the void, too fast to identify. "Contacts," a sensor officer shouted. "Multiple readings, closing in." "Finally," Sareth said with grim satisfaction, "prepare to engage." But when they magnified the image, the entire bridge froze. The shapes weren't ships. They were wrong. Shadows with geometry that defied design, lines that bent space around them. No engines, no heat signatures. They didn't move, they simply appeared closer with every blink. One ensign whispered, those can't be real." The lights dimmed again, and a voice filled every comm channel, low and ancient, not human, not machine, something in between. "You were warned." The fleet fired everything. Plasma beams, rail cannons, torpedoes, thousands of weapons blazing into the dark. The energy vanished before impact, swallowed by the black, as if the void itself drank their fury. Then the return came. No visible shot, no missile, just a pulse of light so faint it looked like a heartbeat. Every Imperial ship hit by that pulse went dead. Their reactors shut down, their crews suspended in zero-G silence, the ships drifting like corpses in space. Panic erupted. Sareth screamed into the comms, "Retreat! Fall back! All ships fall back!" But there was no order left to command. The fleet broke apart, captains fleeing in every direction. Elise watched the scatter with measured calm. "They're running," her aide said. "And the Admiral." Elise zoomed in on the Eternal Vow, the only ship that hadn't fled. "He's still there," she said quietly. "Pride is a stubborn thing." Sareth stood alone on his bridge now. Most of his crew had either fled to the lower decks or refused to move. He stared out into the void, shaking with rage, humiliation, and fear all at once. "Show yourself," he roared into the comms. "Cowards! Deathworld filth! You hide behind ghosts." The black around him seemed to ripple, and then for the first time, he saw it. something vast, rising out of the void like a mountain made of shadow. It wasn't a ship. It was too big, too silent. The sensors couldn't read its dimensions, its existence bending light around it. On its hull, a symbol appeared, glowing faintly blue. A circle of stars around a single dark sphere. Terran Command. Sareth felt his knees weaken. He had found his enemy, and realized too late what that meant. On Lunar Base, Elise Ward received the last transmission from his flagship before it cut off forever. It wasn't a distress call, nor a battle log. Just a single voice whispering through static, broken and terrified, they were never gone. Elise stood there, silent for a long time, then turned to her officers. "And now," she said softly, "the Empire will remember." Back on Lunar Base, the air in Command Center 3 felt heavier than usual, the low hum of machinery mixing with the distant pulse of warning sirens still echoing from the outer perimeter. Commander Elise Ward stood in front of the massive holomap that showed the Empire's scattered fleet like blood splatter across the black. Her arms crossed, her face unreadable. Behind her dozens of officers moved between stations, some whispering updates, others staring at screens filled with strange readings. But no one spoke loudly, no one dared break the silence that followed what they had just witnessed, because everyone knew what it meant. Terran power was awake again, and once it woke, it did not go back to sleep. The tactical officer approached hesitantly, his voice quiet but sharp with disbelief. Confirmation from all systems. The Imperial fleet has fractured. Over 100 ships are dead in space. No life signs. The rest are retreating toward neutral sectors. Elise nodded once, her eyes locked on a single glowing red that still pulsed stubbornly in the center of the screen. "Except him," she said, her voice low, "the Admiral hasn't moved." The aide hesitated. Why would he stay? "Pride," she said simply, "and fear, though he hasn't realized it yet." In the void beyond the border, the eternal vow drifted slowly, surrounded by the shattered echoes of what was once the Empire's finest armada. Ships that had crossed the forbidden line believing themselves untouchable now hung like broken ornaments against the dark, silent, powerless, their once bright hulls now dull and ghost-like. Inside the command deck, emergency lights painted everything in red, and the smell of burnt wiring filled the air. Admiral Sareth sat in his chair, staring blankly at the main display, his mind racing but his body still, like a man caught between disbelief and rage. Around him, the surviving officers whispered, their voices trembling, "Sir, the fleet's gone." One said, "The systems are fried. No backup, no signal. We have to leave." Sareth didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the faint outline of that colossal shape still visible in the distance, a shadow that seemed to stretch across the stars themselves. It hadn't moved, it hadn't attacked, it simply existed, watching. And that was worse than any weapon. "They're taunting us," Sareth muttered, his voice hoarse, "playing with us like prey." He turned sharply to his officers, "Get me engine power. I don't care how, I want movement." But the engineer at the far console whispered, "Sir, the engines respond. But we're not moving. Space itself isn't letting us." A tremor ran through the ship, low and deep, like the growl of a creature too large to comprehend. One of the crew screamed as the floor beneath her flickered like a hologram for a second, revealing the infinite void beneath. "We're being scanned again," the sensor operator yelled. The readings spiked wildly, numbers beyond measurable limits filling the screens before shorting out. "Source!" Sareth demanded. "Everywhere," the operator cried. "It's like they're inside our systems." The lights dimmed again. Then, from the darkness beyond the viewport, a line of soft white light appeared across the black, then another, then hundreds, until an enormous grid shimmered into existence all around them. A lattice of energy that pulsed slowly like a heartbeat. The Terran wall was visible now, not as a myth, but as a living weapon. It encircled the entire sector, trapping the Admiral's fleet in a perfect sphere of light and silence. "My God," one of the officers whispered, "they built a cage out of light." On Luna, Elise Ward watched that same lattice appear on the holographic display, the edges of her mouth tightening, protocol Iron Dawn complete, the technician confirmed. Containment barrier fully deployed. Elise gave a slow nod. "Good." Now they'll see what they woke up. The room was silent for a moment as everyone stared at the data streams. The energy readings were off the charts. Nothing the Empire had ever recorded or understood. Her aide said quietly, "Should we prepare the Leviathan class?" Elise turned to him sharply. "No. Not yet. This isn't a war. It's a reminder." She looked back at the map, the flickering dot of the eternal vow still defiant at the center. "Send the final message," she ordered. Out in space, Saratha's communications screen blinked alive without warning, the Terran emblem glowing blue against the darkness. A voice came through, calm, female, and unmistakably human. "Admiral Sarath of the Galactic Empire. You have violated Terran borders. Your fleet has attacked our defenses. You are now contained. Do not attempt to escape. Any further aggression will result in permanent erasure." The bridge froze. The voice was cold but not angry. It was the voice of a species that didn't need to shout to be feared. Sarath clenched his jaw. "This is the Galactic Empire," he said loudly. "You cannot dictate terms to us. Do you think you can hold the Empire hostage with illusions and empty threats? Show yourself, coward." For a long moment, there was only silence. Then the voice returned, quieter now, almost soft. "You wanted us to show ourselves." The grid outside flared white. For the first time, the Terran fleet revealed itself. Not one ship. Dozens. Hundreds. They appeared from the void like shadows peeling away from the dark, their hulls black and seamless, absorbing light, their engines silent, their outlines edged with faint red and blue energy. Terran ships were smaller than Imperial warships, but denser, heavier, alive with power that rippled through space like the beat of a heart. And in front of them all, at the center of the grid, hung a single ship larger than any structure Sarath had ever seen. A Leviathan-class dreadnought named TCS Resolute, its name glowing faintly across the hull. Its presence alone made the eternal vow feel like a speck of dust. The Terran vessel didn't move, didn't posture. It simply existed like a god that no longer needed worship. Sarath stumbled backward, his pride finally cracking under the weight of awe. This can't be real," he whispered. The comms flickered again, and the same calm voice said, "We remember you, Admiral. Your ancestors tried this once before. It ended the same way." Then came a soft hum. The Resolute's railgun, if that's what it was, began to charge. The energy readings spiked, reaching levels that made the Imperial sensors scream. "Brace!" Sarath shouted, but the blast never hit his ship. Instead, it passed by, a beam of light thinner than a whisper, and yet it sliced through the entire formation of Imperial vessels like they were made of paper. No explosion. No debris. Just vapor. 20 ships gone in one breath. The hum faded. The silence returned. Saratha's heart pounded in his chest. "All ships, retreat," he yelled. "Now! Get us out of here." But his comms officer turned to him slowly, her eyes wide with terror. "Sir, we can't. The drive systems won't engage. We're locked." Outside, the Resolute's hull shimmered once more, its weapons recharging with slow, deliberate patience. And then, through every speaker across the Imperial network, came Elise Ward's voice one last time, unshaken and final. "This is Terran Command. Leave now, or cease to exist. You have 10 minutes." On Luna, Elise watched as the Imperial ships scrambled, colliding, panicking, desperately trying to power engines that would never start. Her aide whispered, "Should we destroy them?" Elise shook her head. "No," she said. "Let them live. Let them tell the story." The aide blinked, surprised. "Why?" She looked up at the holographic projection, where the Leviathan ship loomed like a silent judgment over the crippled enemy fleet. "Because stories travel faster than fleets," she said quietly. "And this one will keep the galaxy awake for another 1,000 years." In the void, the Empire's fleet finally broke free of the grid as Terran Command lowered the containment barrier, allowing them to crawl away. Their retreat was clumsy, terrified, and slow. As the last of them vanished into the dark, the Resolute turned back toward Terran space, its engines flaring once before disappearing back into the shadows, as if it had never been there at all. And when the void fell silent again, the dead line returned to what it had always been. A quiet border, still and watchful, guarding the peace bought long ago with the kind of power that didn't need to be seen twice out beyond the collapsing wave of the Empire's retreat. The void remained unchanged, vast and indifferent, the stars staring down coldly as though nothing at all had happened. But in the heart of that silence the remains of the eternal vow still hung stubbornly in orbit of nothing. Engines cold, hull cracked but not yet broken, her admiral refusing to surrender to the truth now burned into every surviving captain's mind, that they had trespassed into a place older and stronger than their entire civilization. The Emperor's proud banners, once a symbol of fear across 1,000 systems, meant nothing here. In this black ocean, it was Earth that ruled, not with words or treaties, but with the quiet strength of a people who no longer needed to prove themselves. On the bridge, Admiral Saratha's hands trembled slightly as he stared into the fading light of the Terran Leviathan disappearing back into the void. He wanted to shout, to rage, to demand answers, but all that came out was a whisper, "Why didn't they finish us?" None of his crew dared answer. The question lingered like a curse, filling the silent ship as they drifted aimlessly, waiting for rescue that would never come. Back on Luna, deep under the surface where Terran Command's war rooms pulsed with life, Commander Elise Ward stood before the council chamber where the elders of Earth's defense network had gathered. The room was carved from stone and steel, its air filled with the quiet hum of data streams running like veins through the walls. She reported in the same steady tone she always used, "Imperial fleet decimated. Their flagship remains adrift but crippled. Terran assets unharmed. No further aggression detected." The council members exchanged glances, relief and concern in equal measure. One of them, an older general with silver hair and a voice rough from decades of command, leaned forward and said, "You showed them mercy." Elise met his gaze without flinching. "I showed them memory. Mercy would be letting them forget what they saw." Another counselor spoke, her tone wary, "You risked exposure. Every eye in the galaxy will be on us now." Elise's expression didn't change. "Good," she said softly, "let them look, and remember why they stopped the first time." For a long moment, the council chamber was quiet except for the hum of distant machines. Then, slowly, the elder general nodded. "And if they come again?" Elise's eyes turned toward the stars displayed on the wall, a map of the known galaxy pulsing faintly in blue. "Then," she said, "they won't be met with warnings." Her words hung in the air like iron, and no one in that room doubted them. Meanwhile, on the crippled Eternal Vow, Sarath gathered the last of his surviving officers in the command hall, a place that once gleamed with Imperial banners but now flickered with dying lights. "Transmit everything we've seen," he ordered quietly. "Every detail, every moment. The Emperor must know what happened here." His officers hesitated, fear still etched into their faces. "Sir, if they learn how far we fell, then maybe they'll stop sending fools to die," Sarath snapped. But his anger wasn't for them, it was for himself. He looked out the viewport one last time and saw the faint shimmer of Terran defense satellites already withdrawing to their hidden posts. "They let us live," he murmured, "so that we would carry their message for them." The fleet limped home over the next weeks, broken, humiliated, and haunted. When they finally reached Imperial space, only 70 ships remained, and none untouched. The Emperor himself stood in his throne chamber as the transmissions played before him, grainy images of the Leviathan, the lattice of light, the impossible disappearance of ships. When the recording ended, the great hall was silent except for the slow, uneasy breaths of the court. "So," the Emperor said at last, his voice cold and distant, "the ghosts of Earth still guard their borders." His ministers waited for orders, but none came. The Emperor turned his gaze toward the stars beyond the palace window and whispered to himself, "Then we shall redraw the maps." News spread like wildfire across the galaxy. The greatest military force of the Empire had crossed into Terran space and returned broken. Some refused to believe it, calling it propaganda, but others, those who had seen the old wars, knew better. Entire sectors that once brushed dangerously close to Terran borders now withdrew their fleets. Merchants rerouted their trade lanes. Even the pirate syndicates stopped transmitting near the dead line. And on the outer rim, among the quiet colonies that still whispered Earth's name as myth, people looked to the stars and smiled, knowing humanity still watched over them. In the weeks that followed, Lunar Base became a storm of activity. Engineers rebuilt the network that had slept for centuries, linking old sentinels and new stations, turning the dead line into something greater, a living wall of silent guardians. The project was called Operation Eclipse, and Elise Ward oversaw every piece of it. She barely slept, moving from terminal to terminal, her sharp eyes always fixed on the data feeds. One night her aide asked, "Commander, do you ever think we've gone too far? That maybe peace should mean silence, not strength." Elise paused before answering, her voice quiet but unyielding. "Peace doesn't survive silence. It survives preparation. The moment we forget that, someone like Sarath will come again." Across the void, on the Imperial capital, Admiral Sarath was no longer the man who had left in triumph. His name was spoken in hushed tones now, a symbol of humiliation. The Emperor had stripped him of rank but not of guilt. He lived under quiet exile, studying every scrap of data from his doomed campaign, replaying the transmissions late into the night. He had stopped trying to explain to his peers what he had seen. They called it superstition, a failure of nerves. But sometimes, when he was alone, he would glance toward the window and see it again in his mind. That vast Terran ship, silent and unblinking, its hull reflecting no light, its power beyond comprehension. He knew it wasn't a weapon, it was a message, a statement carved into the universe itself. This far, and no further. Months later, the Emperor convened his council once more, demanding a plan to reclaim Imperial pride. Advisors spoke of rebuilding fleets, of deploying spy probes, of finding weaknesses in Terran defenses, but their voices sounded small in that enormous hall. The Emperor finally raised his hand for silence and said, "The humans did not destroy us because they do not see us as a threat. That is the greater insult." He turned to his intelligence minister. "Tell me everything we know about their command structure." The minister hesitated. "Your Majesty, Terran command is invisible. No recorded coordinates, no intercepted transmissions. It's like they're everywhere, and nowhere." The Emperor's jaw tightened. "Then find their shadow. Because somewhere in that darkness, they watch us." But back on Luna, Elise Ward already knew they were watching. Deep beneath the base, in a chamber lined with ancient data cores, she stood before an enormous display showing the recovered signals from the Imperial fleet. She replayed Saratha's final message, the words distorted but clear enough to send a chill down her spine. They were never gone. She closed the file and whispered to herself, "No, Admiral, we were never gone. We just stopped speaking." Her reflection in the screen stared back at her, calm and determined. Humanity didn't need to roar anymore. The galaxy had already learned to listen to its silence. And so, the border of Terran space remained unchanged, a dark horizon that marked the edge of everything the Empire dared not touch. Patrols vanished quietly into its shadow. Drones that wandered too close were found adrift days later, their memories wiped clean. And sometimes, when the void was still enough, captains swore they could see shapes moving beyond the light of their ships. Massive, patient, eternal. The Empire would call them myths again, stories told to frighten new recruits, but the veterans knew better. The humans were still out there, watching, waiting, guarding the line they had drawn centuries ago. And far above the blue glow of Earth, Commander Elise Ward stood before her observation window one last time, the stars stretching endlessly before her. "They'll test us again," her aide said softly. She smiled faintly, her reflection outlined in starlight. "Then we'll remind them again," she said, "because Terran silence isn't weakness, it's the sound the galaxy hears before it kneels." Months passed, and the story of the failed Imperial invasion spread across the galaxy like a storm no one could contain, each retelling twisted by fear and rumor, each version darker than the last, but the truth remained the same. The Empire had crossed the dead line, and Terran command had answered without mercy, without words, without hesitation. Entire sectors that once mocked humanity now spoke its name like a prayer, a warning whispered through the trading lanes and shadow markets. Even the great powers of the Orion Arm, who once called humans extinct, now recharted their maps to make sure their fleets never came within 100 light-years of Terran space. But on Earth, there was no celebration, no declaration of victory, no propaganda broadcast to the stars. Humanity didn't need applause, it needed silence. And that silence was exactly what Commander Elise Ward protected. Deep beneath Lunar Base, she stood before a massive holodisplay of the border regions, the dead line pulsing in faint blue light like a heartbeat in the dark. The technicians moved quietly around her, their movements efficient, their faces calm but serious. "Status of the reconstruction?" she asked. "Sector 12 wall nodes are complete," replied her aide. "Sentinel 3 and 4 are being recalibrated, and the Leviathan Resolute has returned to standby orbit." Elise nodded slowly. "And the Empire?" The aide hesitated. "They've gone silent. No transmissions, no fleet movement near our perimeter." Elise studied the map in silence for a moment. "They are hiding their shame," she said, "but shame doesn't last forever. Sooner or later, they'll start convincing themselves it wasn't real." The aide frowned. "What if they do?" Elise's tone didn't change. "Then we remind them again." Far away, on the imperial capital of Verith Prime, the Emperor sat alone in his throne room, staring at the fragments of the reports his broken admiralty had sent back. Holographic projections of destroyed ships, corrupted black box recordings, garbled transmissions, all that remained of a fleet that had once been his pride. Every time he replayed the final transmission from Admiral Sareth, the same words echoed. They were never gone. The Emperor leaned forward, the gold and silver of his armor dull in the half-light, and whispered, "Then why did they let us live?" His advisors didn't answer. Some believed it was mercy. Others called it arrogance. But the truth, the Emperor suspected, was far simpler. Humanity didn't see them as equals. And that truth burned worse than defeat. Back on Luna, Terran Command wasn't idle. The success of Iron Dawn had awakened more than just the Sentinels. It had reawakened Earth's military machine. Dockyards across Mars roared with life, new ships being built from black alloys that drank in light. The orbital stations above Earth hummed with the quiet power of readiness. Humanity had learned from its own past mistakes. It didn't wait for enemies to strike twice. But even as the war machine rebuilt itself, Elise Ward knew the greatest weapon wasn't the Leviathan fleets or the orbital guns. It was fear. The Empire was fracturing under it. Trade guilds pulled support from their military. Border systems declared independence. The Emperor's rule began to rot from the inside. The destruction of 300 ships hadn't just broken their fleet, it had broken their faith. And yet, despite that, Elise couldn't shake a feeling that something larger was moving beneath the surface. Late one night, she stood in the quiet observation deck of Lunar Base, the Earth rising slowly beyond the reinforced glass, a blue and white marble floating in the dark. The room was silent except for the faint hum of life support systems. Her aide entered, carrying a datapad. "Commander, we've intercepted something," he said quietly. "An encrypted Imperial transmission." She took the pad, her brow furrowing as she scanned the data. The encryption was ancient, Terran in origin. "Where did this come from?" she asked. "Outer edge of Sector 19, the aide replied. "It's been bouncing between Imperial relays, but it's using our old codes." Elise felt a chill crawl up her spine. "Old codes?" she repeated. "As in pre-collapse?" He nodded. "Yes. We thought they were deleted centuries ago." She stared at the transmission header again. The message was short, only 2 words, "They're coming." For the first time in years, Elise felt something close to unease. She turned toward the window, her reflection blending with the stars. "Trace it," she ordered. "I want to know who sent it and how." The aide hurried off, leaving her alone. She stood there for a long time, her thoughts heavy. Humanity had spent generations preparing for outside threats. But what if the danger wasn't outside anymore? What if something else had survived the old wars, something not accounted for in the archives? She thought of the Sentinels, of the old AI networks buried deep under Mars and Europa, systems built by humanity's ancestors before the Great Silence. Were they all still loyal? Or were some still awake, still watching in ways even she didn't understand? Meanwhile, on Verith Prime, unrest had become rebellion. News of the Terran defeat had shattered the illusion of the Empire's invincibility. Riots broke out across the outer colonies. Senators called for peace, for negotiations, but the Emperor silenced them with fear, declaring martial law. Admiral Sareth, broken and disgraced, was dragged from his home in chains, accused of cowardice and treason. As he was marched before the court, he said nothing. Only when the Emperor himself demanded an explanation did he finally speak. "You think we lost to a fleet," he said, his voice hollow, "but you don't understand. They didn't fight us. They judged us. We were children trespassing in a god's graveyard." The hall fell silent, his words echoing like a curse. The Emperor's hand trembled with fury. "Then die knowing you failed to kill ghosts." And with a single gesture, Sareth was gone, erased from the Empire's records as if he had never existed. But history is harder to erase than names. Across the stars, the story of the border spread again, of the Leviathan that erased fleets, of a commander who never raised her voice yet silenced an empire. The tale passed from soldier to soldier, world to world, until even the most distant colonies spoke of the dead line as something sacred. And in that fear, peace returned. Not because the galaxy had changed, but because it finally remembered who humanity really was. In her private chamber, Elise watched the report streams flow by, her eyes tired but focused. Humanity's influence was spreading quietly again, through diplomacy, trade, and whispers of the old alliances that once held the stars together. She knew it couldn't last forever. Nothing ever did. But for now, she allowed herself a rare moment of calm. The Empire would lick its wounds, rebuild, and eventually forget again. And when that day came, when pride once more outweighed memory, Terran Command would be waiting, silent as the void, patient as time. Elise leaned back in her chair, gazing at the stars. "They'll cross again one day," she murmured. "And when they do, the galaxy will remember twice." Beyond Luna's orbit, the Leviathan Resolute drifted silently, its black hull blending perfectly with the void, its lights dimmed, its crew in stasis, waiting for a call that might not come for another century. But its sensors never slept, its mind always awake, always listening. Somewhere deep in its core, a quiet voice repeated the same words again and again, a message coded into its AI memory long ago by the first generation of Terran commanders. Peace is temporary. Vigilance is forever. And as Earth turned slowly beneath the stars, humanity's watch continued, endless, patient, and unseen. Years passed, and the galaxy learned to live with its fear. It became part of the air, part of the silence between every transmission that crossed the stars. Nations that once boasted of their strength now measured their distance from Terran space in reverent silence, charting new maps that left a wide, untouched scar across the void labeled with only two words: Deadline. Traders called it cursed, captains refused to speak its name, and even the bravest explorers who ventured too close returned home pale, whispering of signals that sounded like breathing, of stars that blinked like watching eyes. The Empire rebuilt itself slowly, its people whispering behind closed doors about the humiliation that had almost ended them. But though the Emperor forbade all mention of Earth, no one truly forgot. The memory of the Leviathan burned itself into the minds of every survivor, a silent shadow that hovered in their dreams. Across the galaxy, humanity had become something else, not just a species, but an idea, an untouchable myth, the guardians at the edge of the light. On Lunar Base, Commander Elise Ward stood on the upper platform overlooking the Terran Defense Corps, her uniform crisp, her expression calm but thoughtful, the faint glow of Earth reflecting off the reinforced glass like a pale sunrise. The war was long over, yet work never ended. Her aide said softly, stepping up beside her. "The last Imperial transmissions have ceased. No ships have approached the line in over 5 years." Elise gave a small nod. "Good," she said. "Fear has a longer memory than diplomacy." The aide hesitated. "Do you think they'll ever forget?" Elise's gaze shifted toward the stars, the faint pulse of the dead line shimmering far away. "They will," she said, because arrogance always grows back. It's what keeps the galaxy turning. The aide frowned, and when they forget. Elise's answer came without hesitation, then we'll remind them again. Far beyond Luna, deep in the black void that separated Terran space from the rest of the galaxy, the Leviathan Resolute drifted like a continent of steel and silence, its surface cold and smooth, its cannons dormant, but its heart awake. Within its command deck, a single AI core pulsed faintly with blue light, ancient and intelligent, the mind of an entire generation's vengeance sealed in code. It monitored everything, the faint flicker of nearby stars, the soft hum of cosmic radiation, the echoes of distant transmissions. When a foreign probe strayed too close, the AI didn't destroy it. It simply erased its memory and sent it home, leaving its builders to wonder if it had ever gone missing at all. Humanity didn't need to shout anymore. Its silence was louder than war. Meanwhile, in the far reaches of Imperial space, rebellion was spreading again, not against humanity, but against the Emperor himself. The old nobles whispered that the gods had punished them for arrogance, that the humans were divine retribution made flesh, while the young called them monsters and swore vengeance, building fleets in secret, dreaming of reclaiming the honor they had lost. But vengeance against gods is a dangerous dream. A general on the Imperial frontier once tried to rally his troops with promises of crossing the line again. His fleet vanished 3 days after launch, no wreckage, no distress call, only static. The Emperor said nothing, but from that day on, no one ever spoke of crossing Terran space again. Back on Earth, the world had changed in ways even Elise couldn't have predicted. Cities gleamed again beneath the clouds, oceans were alive with trade, colonies on Mars and Titan flourished. Humanity had rebuilt itself quietly, efficiently, the scars of old wars fading beneath progress. But deep beneath that peace, Terran command still pulsed like a hidden heart, watching, listening, waiting. Elise had become more than a commander now. She was a symbol, the quiet voice of reason behind every decision that shaped Terran destiny. She had never sought fame, yet her name became legend among the young officers who trained in the shadow of the dead line. Some called her the voice of the void. Others whispered that she was part machine, her mind linked to the Sentinel network itself. She never confirmed or denied it. One evening, as she stood alone in her quarters, a soft alert echoed across the room. A transmission, unmarked, encrypted in the old Terran code, the kind used during the first wars of humanity's expansion. She approached the console, entered her clearance, and watched as the screen flickered to life. The message was brief, composed of only one line: movement detected beyond the Perseus reach. Her breath slowed. For the first time in years, something had moved out there, something not Imperial, not known. She stared at the coordinates for a long moment, her mind calm but calculating. Then she whispered, "So it begins again." She turned, pressing her hand to the console. "Alert the Council. I want every Sentinel awake within the hour." Across the void, dormant Terran war stations began to glow like stars being born. The lattice of the dead line flickered to life, brighter and sharper than before. On the Leviathan Resolute, deep beneath its armored skin, the AI stirred, ancient engines roaring softly for the first time in a decade. Its eyes opened, vast and blue, reflecting the light of 1,000 galaxies. Humanity was not preparing for war. They were preparing for a reminder. Back in her command room, Elise Ward stood at the observation deck, Earth shining behind her like a promise. She spoke quietly to her aide, "They'll come again. Not the Empire this time, but something worse. Something that doesn't remember what silence means." Her aide's voice was steady. "Then what do we do?" Elise's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile, the kind that carried both mercy and warning. "We do what humanity always does," she said. "We endure, we adapt, and when the universe forgets who we are, we teach it all over again." And as the stars blinked one by one across the endless black, the ancient power of Earth awakened once more, invisible but absolute, watching from every shadow, every silence. The galaxy slept in the peace that humanity's presence allowed, never realizing that peace itself was a gift given by the same species it once tried to erase. At the edge of the universe, the border glowed faintly again, a single unbroken line stretching forever into the dark. The line humanity drew, and never needed to cross again.